Now I'm going to get into my Vedic astrology chart, including not just the birth chart, but my Navamsha, and maybe I'll look at the Shamsha a little bit too, which is two other divisional charts that have some more information. I've been looking at my Vedic astrology chart for quite a while now. I first found out about it like 10 years ago, 10 or 11 years ago now. Um, and it and I'd never resonated with my Western chart so much. It just something didn't feel right about it. But once I discovered my Vedic chart, I was like, wow, this is like there's so much here and it goes so deep. And so I've been studying a lot about Vedic astrology for a while now and got some training under Kamala Sutton, who's a Vedic astrologer. So I know a good amount about the system now, and I've been making videos about it, about celebrities and stuff. But yeah, I would say, if you're getting into astrology, I would say go Vedic, because it's just such a more developed system. It's much more advanced than Western astrology is. You can include the outer planets, which is the main thing that I would say Western astrology provides that Vedic astrology doesn't traditionally provide. But I use this app called Cosmic Insights, and it allows you to add the outer planets on there. And so the outer planets I've been studying too more recently, and they do really highlight some interesting things, especially when there's aspects to key planets like I have in my chart, with Pluto here, and then my Rahu, which is conjunct Uranus Neptune. But I'll get into that in a second. But yeah, so Vedic astrology is super awesome. It's a little different than Western astrology in terms of how the chart is made, and the calculation is different for the zodiac. I wouldn't trust the Western calculation because it's no longer aligned with the constellations as it was when it was first made. It's actually an inaccurate calculation now. So it really distorts what you're getting information wise in the chart. It's like a distorted chart. So I wouldn't trust it. But you can do whatever you want, Everybody has their own process, and you can figure out how you relate to it or what you want to do with it. But I really found that Vedic astrology is the hidden gem. So anyway, I'll get into the details of my chart now. So overall, I'm a Capricorn rising. So in Vedic astrology, they look at your rising sign as your main sign. So if they ask like what my sign is, I would say Capricorn, because that's my rising sign. And then what they look at secondarily from there is the moon, which for me is Aries, and then the sun, which is Aries also for me. But they also look at the moon in terms of the nakshatra, which is really a big thing, which I'll talk about in a second too. And my moon nakshatra is Bharani. But yeah, let's look through this chart. I'll jump around to different things that I see and address everything that's here. So one of the big things that's here on my chart is that I have Saturn in Capricorn in the ascendant, and because my rising sign is Capricorn, that makes the Saturn in the first house. So I actually have a strong Saturn because it's in Capricorn, but it's in the ascendant. And so when you have Saturn in the first house, that usually indicates that this life is really a big leadership life, and it's really about building a legacy. That's what Capricorn in general as a rising sign is all about, building a legacy. So if you have Saturn in the first house, you'll probably feel the pressure of Saturn kind of like weighing you down. Like you feel like you've got like a big responsibility, and that weighs you down, and you feel like kind of overwhelmed by that. Like that you have I've got like a big role to play. It feels like, and it feels overwhelming and scary. And that's kind of what the Saturn energy reinforces. And so it actually, when it's in the first house, it makes it hard for self-assertion and self-expression. It makes it really hard to do that. And when I was younger, that was definitely something that was difficult for me. And as I got older, now that I'm 33, I've been through my Saturn return. So it's been through all the houses and different areas of my life in the transit. And so now I actually have a lot more freedom from that heaviness of that energy, and I know how to deal with it now. So I'm able to deal with it better. But really, it's all about what Saturn represents for me is developing discipline and structure so that I can move towards my goal and my legacy that I'm building. And so that's a long process that goes over my whole life. But basically, I'm a Saturnian type. I'm a Saturn led person. So Saturn is really big. I'm actually going to talk about the Virenci Yoga, which is something that I have in my chart. So I'll talk about the different aspects of that. So part of that is having Saturn in Capricorn in the first house. The first house is a Kendra. It's one of the cardinal houses, so it's strong. But with Virenci Yoga is a special yoga that happens when Saturn is in its own sign or exaltation sign in a Kendra, along with Jupiter being in its own sign, exaltation sign in a Kendra or Trikona, which is the 5th or 9th house, and as well as the 5th lord, the 5th house lord, which is Venus in my case, in its own sign or exaltation sign. So I have all that. I have Saturn and Capricorn in the first house. I have Jupiter in Cancer exalted in the 7th house, which is a Kendra. And then I have Venus, which is my 5th house lord, in Taurus in the 5th house. So that gives me Virenci Yoga, which is actually a really strong yoga. It represents Brahma, the creator, archetypally. But it deals with being able to have wisdom, intelligence, and creativity, all those things to be able to provide, and is a strong indicator for kind of like a advanced, role to play, with all that capability there. So it's pretty cool to see that I have that in the chart. It's actually a very rare thing to have. But I learned about that in the process of taking Kamala Sutton's classes, learning about the yogas. So that's a really interesting one to look at. So let's see what else is in here. Let's do Sun and Moon in Aries. So my Sun is actually in Aries at 2 degrees, and that the nakshatra Ashwini, which is the symbol is the horses, like 2 horses, and they're kind of this driving. It's like that Aries energy that's driving forward through things. It has this speed to it. It has energy behind it, and it has this like healing ability. So it's actually, Sun is exalted in Aries, especially in Ashwini. Ashwini is one of the kind of more leadership energies out of all the nakshatras, because it's actually the first nakshatra out of all of them. So that's more of a kind of leadership energy. And something interesting that I have is my Sun is Virgotama in the Navamsha, which I'll get into in a second. But that means that it's actually still an Aries in the Navamsha, which reinforces the strength of the Sun in my chart. And it's also like that in the Dashamsha, if you look at that one, and other charts too. But it's still an Aries. And that's because of the early degree in my chart, early degree of Aries. So I have a really strong Sun. It's in Aries in pretty much all the divisional charts, including the birth chart. So I have, my Sun is really strong with that placement. I actually don't know too many people else who have that, but my aunt has Sun in Aries in early degree too, and she has the same thing. She's a Ashwini Sun, and has her Sun in Virgotama in the other charts, divisional charts, and she has the goal of dominance also in her Michael teaching. So there's something about Aries Suns having the goal of dominance is kind of like a common thing. So the Aries Sun is kind of a leadership energy overall. So my Moon is also in Aries, 24 degrees, and that's in the nakshatra Bharani. And Bharani is the symbol for that is the vagina, but it's more of this creative element, creative energy, kind of like where you're building up energy in the womb, nurturing the creative energy, and it builds up, and you're holding on to it, and then you give birth to it at some point. And so that's the process for people with Bharani, is that they have this capacity to hold on to energy, to build it up, and release it in creative acts. So they're basically connected to the inner world and bringing that into the outer world, into the external into external manifestation. They're very creative overall, and they have this tie to kind of the birth and death cycle of things. It's kind of very scorpionic in a way, you could say. Bharani is in that sense. Um, Very kind of tied to the occult in a lot of ways. There's a lot of people, like other people I know that are Moon Bharani, are James Braha. He was a Vedic astrologer. Um, I think yeah, Carl Jung also is Moon Bharani, and he's this the depth psychologist, the famous depth psychologist. Sigmund Freud also has a lot of Bharani placements. So there's something to do with psychology as an interest for people who have a Bharani placements. But then there's also like graphic designers and stuff that have Bharani. So that's really interesting to see, and I can relate to that because I'm a graphic designer also. But I have this interest in the occult in general and stuff, so I can see how that ties to my moon. So both my sun and moon are in Aries in the fourth house. So the fourth house is kind of like a very mystical house. It's one of the cardinal houses, so it's one of the main important areas. Um, it deals with the home and family life a little bit, and mother connection to mother, but really overall is it deals with kind of your connection to yourself on an internal level, your private emotional world inside, and feeling connected to yourself and knowing yourself. So that's kind of the big part with the fourth house. I noticed that people who have prominent fourth house placements tend to be very spiritual, and so it's kind of this mystical house, and one of the most powerful. It's the only water house that's a Kendra, a cardinal house. So there's something very mystical about it. But this could also indicate for me, having Sun and Aries there and Moon there, that my internal life, my private life is really big, and kind of my home life is really huge for me. And I'll be spending a lot of my time in this life in the home and in private places, and like it could be also tied to ashrams, but also because Sun is exalted in Aries in the fourth house, I could have like a special home. And so I've been feeling into that for a while, that I'm really interested in having, like, kind of building like this modular home like out in the forest or somewhere surrounded by nature, and having this like really special home where I can do all the things I want to do all at home and just stay home all the time. That's basically what I want to do, and then go out to the world and go, maybe go on tour or something, playing my music, or go and do talks or something. That's kind of one thing that I want to do in the future. But yeah, so I've been sensing, this kind of coming big home life and having a special home, and I have my own home right now in terms of an apartment, but and I spend a lot of time here, but I'm looking to have that special home someday, and so that's what that kind of indicates for me in my karma with the sun and moon in the fourth house in Aries. So let's see what else I can look at here. I actually have Pluto aspecting my moon. You can see Pluto is at 25 degrees. I'm talking about the left chart here, just so you know. The one on the left right now, that's the birth chart. So you can see my moon is at 24 degrees, and then Pluto is at 25 degrees, and they're opposite from each other. So my moon is opposite Pluto. And so what this signifies for me is kind of a really intense energy dealing with moon energy, and the moon is tied to females in general. So my experience of females, especially my mom, moon represents mother as well. It's kind of like a smothering, domineering, controlling energy with females, and so that's actually been my experience in terms of people I've dated in the past, and my experience of dealing with my mom is that she's been really uh really she wants to like take care of me, but it's been kind of an intense energy to make sure I'm okay. but then I've dealt with this kind of smothering, controlling energy in past relationships with women, and it's been a hard thing to deal with. But I've been learning how to deal with it because I used to be a lot more passive, and throughout my relationships, I've learned how to be more assertive and state my boundaries and my needs more strongly, so I'm not overcome by that energy. But overall, that kind of like having the Pluto there aspecting the moon, that's affecting my internal emotional sense of myself. So it kind of brings this intensity to it, um, and makes me more Plutonian overall, which is more in touch with kind of like the underground underlying currents of energy, and basically being in touch with the unconscious on a certain level is what happens having this aspect from Pluto on my moon. So that's really interesting to deal with, and I've been exploring that a lot. It can bring like psychic ability and different things like that. So that's really interesting. So let's see what else we can talk about here. Talked a little bit about my Jupiter. Jupiter is in Cancer in the 7th house. So my relationships are going to be, I'm going to have a lot of kind of like gurus, you could say, through my relationships. Also, the 7th house is the 10th house from the 10th house. So it kind of represents the career in a sense. So in the sense that Jupiter energy is present in my career. So that could be me being a teacher, being a spiritual teacher in a sense, but also having a lot of connections to other people in my life and my relationships that can be teachers to me. And so my relationships could have this spiritual element to them in my relationships, especially with Jupiter being exalted in Cancer. And then some other things I can look at in terms of my relationships. I have the Jupiter also rules the 12th house. So that brings more of a spiritual element to my relationships because the 12th house is very spiritual. And then Jupiter also rules the 3rd house, which is dealing with communication. So communication is really big in my relationships. It's a really important aspect of my relationships. So that's also an aspect there in terms of my relationships. Some other things I can look at here is my career. So if you're looking at the 10th house, I've got Libra there, so that ruled by Venus. So, and Venus is in my 5th house in Taurus. So it's actually in its own sign in the 5th house. 5th house is all about creativity and special. It's like special talent from past lives. So if you have planets in the 5th house, usually kind of indicates some kind of past life talent. But it also deals with children and creativity in general. So my career is tied to 5th house matters, which is about creativity and the arts and expression and stuff like that. So that's a big part of my tied to the arts, to expression, to creativity in that way. It could also potentially be working with children, which is something I've been contemplating a little bit in terms of like maybe making like a children's album or something like that. So that's interesting to look at. Another thing to look at in my chart is my Mercury in Pisces at the 29th degree. So that's actually my Atma card, my soul planet. So basically, out of all the planets on my chart, I'm basically represented as Mercury, and Mercury in Pisces. So it's actually the nakshatra is Revati, which is the last nakshatra. But it deals. They call that being wealthy in mind and spirit. But it's basically Pisces energy, and so this makes my mind, my intellect, very intuitive. So I'm able to see things in a very intuitive way in terms of how I intellectualize things. But this also gives me a strong musical ability with Mercury and Pisces. And what's really interesting is my band Holy Tears, the bassist and drummer also have Mercury and Pisces at like the 29th degree in Revati, just like me. And they're also Aries suns like me as well. So we have something in common there going on. And they're both, they're both very musical, obviously being musicians. And so we all have that Mercury and Pisces, Atmakarika, 29th degree kind of placement, which is really interesting to see. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about in my birth chart is the Rahu Ketu axis, which is the north node and south node of the moon. And so uh, the south node of K2 is all about what your past, and Rahu north node is all about what you're moving towards in this life and what you're craving to experience. And so I'll talk about my south node first, my K2. It's conjunct Mars in the 6th house. You can see down here on the left, bottom left. And Mars with K2 is a really strong significant because it's one of the personal planets. And Mars deals with your drive, your energy, your willpower, kind of your action-oriented energy. And it being with K2 signifies that my Mars energy, my martial talent, has been developed really strongly from past lives. That I've been engaging with Mars energy a lot in past lives. So I'm really advanced in terms of dealing with my Mars energy, my drive, my willpower, my action-oriented ability. And this could mean that I've been like a warrior or in war in past lives, and I've heard that through some psychics and shamans telling me that I've had lives as like a commander in war. So I can really resonate with that feeling. And in terms of my bipolar experiences too, this really resonates with the Mars K2. And I know somebody else who has Mars K2 that has bipolar one. One of my friends has that. And so there's something about having strong primal energy, I think, is tied to this. But because it's with K2 kind of holds things back or holds things down and kind of suppresses it. So for a long time, I felt kind of disconnected from my Mars kind of energy, my self-assertion, my drive, my willpower. Those kinds of things were hard to access for me. And it's also tied to my anger. So it's been hard to get angry. But over time, I've been able to get more in touch with that. And really what that signifies for me is that I'm learning how to embrace my Mars energy in a leadership kind of way in this life, using Mars in the highest sense, which is as for leadership. And it's also very strategic. Mars K2 signifies very strategic kind of mind. And so also because they're in the 6th house deals with obstacles and enemies, but also about healing. So with Mars and K2 there, I could have a talent from past lives for healing, but also overcoming obstacles. And Mars and K2 are malefics, and they're strong in the 6th house, actually. So that means I can actually overcome any enemies that come my way. I can deal with whoever comes up against me, I can deal with it, which is pretty cool. So that's my South Node K2 placement. And I'll talk about my Rahu now. So my Rahu is what I'm moving towards in this life and what I'm craving to experience. And it's in Sagittarius in the 12th house. And it's conjunct Uranus and Neptune. So it's a really interesting placement. Rahu in the 12th house signifies a moving towards more of the internal world, isolation, doing things like meditation, being in altered states, being connected to dreams, exploring intuition, things like that in general. So it's very, very spiritual energy, and I've been moving more towards spiritual awakening, enlightenment, things like that are kind of indicated with Rahu in the 12th house usually. And I've had some of my own awakening experiences that are really, I think, indicated by my Rahu placement. Rahu amplifies whatever it's touching. So because Neptune and Uranus are there, this kind of gives me some interesting things going on. Neptune is very, dreamy, intuitive, creative, artistic. So that amplifies that energy. And then Uranus is very kind of boundary breaking, pioneering kind of energy, very future focused, and so and kind of otherworldly in a sense, very very unique and different. So I can have some influence from there from being kind of different in that sense. So there's some different interesting energy tied to my Rahu, and I'm still understanding how that works. Um, but I think Osho had Uranus with Rahu, and so I have that too. And there's kind of like some kind of pioneering energy with that there. So I'm interested to see how that manifests in my life. Rahu is in Sagittarius, so and my K2 is in Gemini. So basically, that axis is talking about me moving more towards my own truth and my own interest in higher knowledge and philosophy. And so when I was younger, I was more towards, more resonating with the Gemini side with my K2, being able to see other people's perspectives and relate to other people in different ways like that. But as I got older, I got more in touch with my own truth. And so I've been developing my own philosophy in terms of like studying higher knowledge in general, taking classes on Vedic astrology, for example, or human design, or doing my master's program as I'm doing currently. All that is pointing to the development of higher knowledge and developing my own truth, and this even like factored in the way I present myself. Um, I used to like match like with the Gemini stuff going on, the K2, I would come to work sometimes. I'd be matching like someone's outfit. Like I'd be wearing the same outfit as somebody else, and that would happen a lot. And it would be different people in the office. I would be matching somebody else each day. It was pretty weird, and I could tell I wasn't so like in touch with my own truth at the time. It was harder to access. But now I've developed my kind of my own, my own way of presenting myself. I've got like these tattoos now, very bold tattoos, and I wear certain colors like black, maroon, and dark blue as kind of my main colors. And so I have more of a developed sense of myself at this point in the way I present myself, and so that's kind of come out in terms of my own process. So now I feel like I'm much more in touch with my own truth. I'm developing my own philosophy, and that's something I want to communicate as a teacher. Is like that's what the Sagittarius energy is, which is ruled by Jupiter. So it's a lot of kind of being a teacher, spiritual teacher, basically, is what the Rahu and Sagittarius represents. So yeah, that's everything in my birth chart. I just want to talk a little about some stuff in my other charts. So actually, real quick, I'll change this one to moon chart. So you can actually look from your chart from the moon's perspective. So it moves the moon into the ascendant, and then you can see where all the things are placed. One interesting thing to look at is the Rahu K2 axis from here, and from here, from the moon's perspective, the Rahu goes into the ninth house from the moon. So that's even more energy, kind of aligned with Sagittarius kind of energy, the higher knowledge, um, gurus, philosophy, spiritual teaching. And so that's going to be a really big area of my life, especially because Sun is there too, because you can look from the Sun chart as well. So this is a really strong chart for me as well to look at. But I'm not going to get too much into that. Let's look at let's look at my Navamsha real quick. So Navamsha is another main chart that you look at in Vedic astrology. It's kind of like dissecting the main birth chart and seeing what all the placements are there. And it kind of shows like your deeper spiritual purpose, and as well as what your life will be like post marriage, like in later life. And so some things I can see here is my moon moves into Scorpio. So I'm an Aries moon in my birth chart, but my moon is in Scorpio in my Navamsha chart. So I have some Scorpio kind of energy going on with my moon, uh, which deals more with kind of like the underlying energies, the occult, and being more um, the deeper underlying energy and spiritual connection. Um, my Mercury is still in Pisces, so it's Virgotama. That's what Virgotama means. It's in the same sign. So my Mercury is actually strong, even though Mercury is actually debilitated in Pisces because it's behaving opposite to what Mercury is used to. But because it's Virgotama, it's actually strengthened. So I have a really strong Mercury in Pisces. So my intuitive ability to deal with my intellect is really strong. So another thing that's really big here is I have 3 planets to Aries in the 8th house. So the 8th house is more occult, death, birth, transformation kind of thing. And so transformative experiences are going to be really big for me, having Venus, Sun, and Saturn in the 8th house in my Navamsha. Sun is still in Aries, so that's for Gotama as well. So my Sun is really strong, like I said earlier. But this brings, more transformational energy. And so I've been going through lots of big transformations in my life. And I feel like that's a really strong signature of my life. The K2 Rahu moves into the 4th house. It's for Virgotama also. It's in Sagittarius and K2 Gemini. So that's another Virgotama placement. So I have a lot of Virgotama planets, which really strengthens my chart a lot. But K2 in the 10th house brings kind of more of a spiritual kind of career, alternative career. And Rahu in the 4th house means I'm moving more towards the home life kind of experience. So that's some things in my Navamsha I wanted to point out. And then real quick, I'll talk about my Dashamsha, which is the chart that's designated for career. And one thing I just want to point out in here is my 10th house ruler so my 10th house has Pisces and has K2 there. So again, K2 being there indicates a spiritual career, alternative career. But you can look to see where the ruler of that house is, which is Jupiter, and Jupiter is in Gemini in the ascendant. And so when I had my reading with James Braha, he pointed this out to me, and he said that having the 10th house ruler Jupiter in the 1st house indicates that I'll use my physical body in my career. And this could be through me being a performer or being a teacher, like being on stage in front of people. So being like, a musician performing on stage, but using my body and my energy as I'm performing, or being a spiritual teacher where I'm using my body's energy in the interaction with my audience. So that's an interesting thing to see. And I've been feeling into me doing that later in my life, going on tour, playing shows and doing talks on stage in front of people. So it's really interesting when he said that because I really resonate with that. So we'll see how it happens, but that's kind of my goals for my life. But yeah, so that's all the stuff that I see in my Vedic chart. And you can see it goes really deep and there's a lot of different themes going on. But I totally resonate so deeply with everything that's present in my chart. So like I said, I recommend checking out Vedic astrology, learning as much as you can about it, because this is really a fantastic occult system, and it reveals so many patterns and things that are operating in your life. It's really the macrocosm reflects the microcosm. So the state of our solar system and where everything is placed in relation to each other is really highlighting different themes that are happening, and there's a synchronicity that happens with our birth and what's happening in the solar system and the cosmos in general, that's really important to pay attention to. And there's this really good book, Cosmos and Psyche, by Richard Tarnas, that talks about how the main aspects between the planets, the outer planets, really reflect what's going on in the world anytime, and with key people in history and what's been happening. So really interesting book to check out. It really reinvigorated my interest in astrology after taking a break from it, because I can see how these patterns are really playing out. And so, yeah, I really love Vedic astrology, and I'd recommend anybody who's interested in astrology to really give Vedic astrology your time and attention to really learn as much as you can, because it's such a more advanced system. There's much more going on to check out, and it's going to be different than your Western chart. So So yeah, that's it. That's my Vedic astrology charts.